I remember the first day I noticed how thin the walls in our house had grown. It wasn't that the drywall had weakened, or that I was hearing more street noise than usual. Rather, it was the emptiness in the silence. I'm Charlotte, 38 years old, married for just over a decade to Victor. Our home, a modest two-story in a quiet cul-de-sac, was once a haven for dinner parties, cat naps on the sunlit sofa, late-night confidences. Over time, the hush between us expanded. We still had the outlines of a comfortable life, with an efficient if dull rhythm. We had decent jobs, stable incomes, even a supportive extended family. But I sensed a deep stillness inside these walls, a kind of invisible distance I couldn't quite put words to. Victor was the sturdy anchor of our household. He paid the bills diligently, did the yard work on Saturday mornings, and seldom complained. People admired his reliability. I did too. At least, I thought I did. Yet there were nights I'd lie awake, feeling a hollow ache in my chest, realizing how little we actually shared anymore beyond practicalities. We talked about groceries, the next dentist appointment, which brand of vacuum filter to order. The everyday tasks overshadowed what once felt magical. Now, it was as if I was waiting for something, an undefined longing I pushed aside whenever it surfaced. That was my state of mind when I met Alina.
At the time, I assumed she was just another new hire at our advertising firm, someone young, bright-eyed, and enthusiastic. I'd been working in the creative department for nearly 15 years, overseeing teams that brainstorm marketing ideas for various clients. Alina was assigned as my assistant. She was 24, brimming with fresh ideas and an eagerness to impress. Within a week, I noticed she had a gift for design software and layout editing, aspects that could take others months to master. I admired her, though our roles often kept us at different ends of a busy open-plan office. The first time I really saw her, though, saw her beyond the typical boss-assistant dynamic, was on a Thursday evening when we had to work late to finalize a pitch. The overhead lights in the office were half-dimmed, most employees gone, leaving only me and a few diehards hunched over computers. Alina was at her desk, hair pulled back, face illuminated by the glow of her screen, focusing on the final details of our slideshow. Something about her concentration, the quiet determination in her eyes, struck me. I felt an unexpected sense of closeness, a spark of empathy for how she was pouring her heart into her job. No complaints, even though we were well past quitting time. I ordered delivery from a nearby cafe to keep us going, sandwiches, salad, and coffee. She offered to pay for her share, but I waved it off. We wound up sitting in the break area, laptops perched on the table while we chewed and sipped, occasionally refining slides or discussing color palettes. After we finished the bulk of the work, we fell into casual conversation, half from exhaustion. She told me she'd moved to the city alone, dreaming of a career in advertising after finishing a design degree. I found her ambition refreshing. At her age, I would have been terrified to strike out on my own. She asked about me, and I gave the usual bullet points. Married, living in the suburbs, stable position at the firm. The way she listened made me feel oddly valued, as if my routine life might hold stories worth hearing. We didn't finish until nearly midnight. As we stepped out into the parking lot, the crisp night air jolted my tired mind. She offered to walk me to my car. I laughed, saying it was safe enough, but accepted. Something felt comforting about not leaving the building alone. Under the fluorescent glow of the street lamp, I noticed how her eyes, a warm brown, carried both excitement and a trace of nerves. I wondered if she was worried about impressing me, or if something else simmered behind that polite expression. We said goodnight, parted ways. I drove home, my chest fluttery, unsure why. By the time I slipped into bed, Victor was asleep, one arm draped across his pillow. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the entire night in my mind, perplexed by how a mundane overtime session could leave me so quietly charged. A week later, we landed the client pitch. thanks in large part to Alina's designs. Our department head singled her out for praise, and I saw how she glowed under the spotlight. That evening, our boss treated the team to celebratory drinks at a lounge downtown. Alina and I ended up next to each other at a high table, sharing a basket of sweet potato fries, while others laughed loudly over by the bar. A faint hush fell between us whenever the crowd's noise ebbed, and I asked about her life beyond work. She mentioned her love of painting, how she'd fill entire sketchbooks with watercolor landscapes. I confessed that I used to paint in college, but gave it up over the years because life got hectic. She nudged me, half joking that I should try again. Something about her playful challenge made me grin. We didn't stay too late. I had an early meeting the next morning, and she had a friend visiting from out of town. But as we left the bar, Alina pulled me aside and said, "Thank you for believing in me this past month. It means more than you know." I blinked, touched by the sincerity in her voice. I wanted to reply that it wasn't that big a deal, but I caught something in her gaze that was both earnest and admiring. It stirred a strange warmth in my stomach. I gave a quick smile, patted her shoulder, and left. During the drive home, I wrestled with a jumble of emotions that didn't quite make sense. Weeks turned into months, and Alina became an integral part of our team. She worked closely with me on several projects, and we fell into a comfortable rhythm. We texted outside office hours, mostly about design ideas or meeting reminders. Occasionally, she'd send me a meme or some random photo, and I'd respond with a laughing emoji. I told myself it was a normal coworker bond, except I felt an undercurrent I couldn't define. She started teasing me about how grown-up and established my life was. I teased her about being too young to know half of the references to old ad campaigns I mentioned. We enjoyed each other's company, our banter light and witty. Even so, deep down, something subtle sparked each time we found ourselves alone in a conference room or walking together to lunch. The tension finally broke, or revealed itself, after another late night at the office. We were finalizing materials for a major conference. I was stressed, ironically, about a detail I shouldn't have let slip. Alina stayed behind to help, even though she was off the clock. Around 9 p.m., I realized I'd left my phone charger at home. My battery was almost dead. Alina offered hers, but it was a different model. Frustrated, I rummaged in my desk, finding an old charger that barely worked. She gave a sympathetic laugh. I rubbed my temples, mumbled something about how my personal life felt about as chaotic as my charger situation. She asked if I was okay, her voice soft and concerned. I said yes, though tears threatened. Not tears of heartbreak, but of overwhelming emptiness. She stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on my arm. "Charlotte," she said gently, "you seem worn down. Is there anything I can do?" Her warmth and sincerity hit me harder than expected. I found myself telling her a little too much, that I felt stuck, that my marriage had become a series of sighs and polite nods, that I missed the joy and creativity I once thrived on. Alina listened without judgment, eyes reflecting empathy. In that moment, it felt like she was the only person in the world who saw me. My voice caught as I whispered, "Sorry to dump this on you." She shook her head firmly. "You've been there for me at work. Let me be here for you now." And before I realized what was happening, I leaned in, seeking the closeness of another human soul. We ended up in a tight embrace, me clinging to her like a lifeline, tears slipping out. Then, for one pulse-pounding instant, I felt her lips brush my temple, a gentle, comforting gesture. A spark shot through me, too intense to ignore. I pulled back, startled, meeting her gaze. In the hush of that near-deserted office floor, we stared at each other, hearts pounding loud enough to fill the silence. I was older, married, entrenched in a life that had little room for mistakes. She was young, brilliant, free in ways I wasn't. And yet the weight of that moment smothered all rational thought. We didn't kiss that night, but a boundary had been crossed, acknowledged in our mutual hush. I mumbled that I had to go. She nodded, stepping back. I drove home in a daze, my cheeks flushed, hands shaking. Victor was dozing on the couch, the TV playing a rerun. I slid into our bedroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My mind screamed that this was insane. How could I feel so powerfully for someone who wasn't my husband, and a woman nearly 15 years younger than me at that? In the days after, Alina and I danced around each other, unsure how to address the shift. At one point, I tried to bring it up, but she shook her head, not wanting to escalate anything if I wasn't comfortable. And I, too, felt torn. My logical side said this was a momentary confusion, a midlife crisis. My heart whispered something else, that for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Meanwhile, Victor and I fell deeper into a quiet rut. We shared the same bed but rarely touched beyond cursory pecks on the cheek. I told myself it was normal for long marriages to go through dull phases, but my chest tightened every time I pictured Alina's gentle concern, the solace I found in her presence. Eventually, we confronted the tension one Friday after a work outing. The firm had a casual get-together at a nearby restaurant. I tried to keep some distance from Alina, worried that coworkers might notice anything if we hovered together. She chatted with others, but her eyes met mine often across the room. Something knotted in my stomach every time. Once the gathering wound down, I left, expecting to head home. But as I reached my car, I saw her stepping onto the sidewalk, scanning the parking lot. My heart lurched. She spotted me, hesitated, then approached. "Charlotte," she said softly, "can we talk?" I heard the unspoken gravity in her voice. A flicker of panic warred with an irrepressible longing. I agreed, stepping away from the main road, finding a dimly lit corner by a closed coffee shop. She stood close, arms folded, as though trying to hold herself together. "I can't keep pretending that everything is normal," she began, voice shaking. "I know we haven't said it outright, but there's something here. And it's confusing, because of who we are, because of your situation. I'm not trying to push you into anything, but not talking about it is tearing me up." 1,000 responses clogged my throat. My mind reeled with the knowledge that crossing lines with her could shatter the life I'd built. Yet I was halfway across the line already, wasn't I? I swallowed hard, tears prickling my eyes. "I feel it too," I whispered. "And I hate that I do. But it's there." She exhaled, relief and sorrow mixing. "What do we do?" I shook my head, voice unsteady. "I don't know. I never wanted to betray anyone. But I can't deny how I feel." My breath hitched, tears threatening. "I feel alive with you, and that scares me." She touched my hand, lacing our fingers momentarily. The rush of warmth nearly buckled my knees. We stepped closer in that dark alley, our silhouettes just visible under a distant street lamp. Then, as though drawn by a force neither of us could resist, we kissed, softly at first, an unsure exploration, turning more urgent when we realized how inevitable it felt. My head spun with a cocktail of guilt, exhilaration, and the raw sense that I was unraveling years of self-control in a single act. We pulled apart, breathing hard, stunned by the intensity of it all. She whispered, "I'm so sorry," as though apologizing for igniting something unstoppable. I swallowed, tears escaping. "Me too." We stood there, foreheads touching, heartbreak flickering behind the flicker of desire. Eventually we parted. I walked to my car and drove home, aware that I'd taken a step I could never fully undo. Over the next weeks, we plunged into a secret we never named. We found pockets of time, after work or an occasional lunch break, to be alone. Our closeness was more emotional than physical. Sure, we shared kisses, tender embraces, but mostly we bonded over confessions that neither of us had shared with anyone else. She spoke of her fear that she'd never be good enough in such a competitive industry. I revealed the regret of letting my own creative passions fade for a life that felt routine. Each moment with her was a burst of color against the gray background of my daily obligations. My nights at home grew more stifling. I'd lie in bed, turned away from Victor, tears sliding down my cheeks with quiet despair, torn between shame and euphoria. I told myself maybe it was a phase, that eventually I'd come to my senses, either ending this affair or finding a more honest path. Yet the deception continued, day after day. Victor seemed distracted by his own stress at work, never suspecting I might be entangled in a secret relationship. I felt guilty for how little effort I made to reconnect with him. The stark truth was that I couldn't seem to muster the energy to salvage a marriage that felt beyond saving. Meanwhile, Alina and I exchanged hidden glances at the office, texted at odd hours. My heart soared whenever I saw her name pop up on my phone. The cost of our secrecy kept mounting. I grew anxious at every turn, wary that a coworker might notice the tension or that Victor might check phone logs, but I couldn't force myself to stop. Then everything cracked one Friday evening. I told Victor I was going to a friend's birthday dinner. In reality, I drove to Alina's apartment, a small studio near the old part of town. She'd prepared a simple meal, music playing softly. We ate at her tiny kitchen table, laughing about how neither of us was a great cook. Then we curled up on her sagging sofa, confiding little pieces of ourselves in the hush of the lamplight. Eventually, the closeness sparked physical warmth, and we found ourselves kissing again, hearts pounding. We sank into a state of breathless affection, each minute a fragile miracle. I left around midnight, promising to text once I was home safely. But on my drive, I missed a call from Victor. By the time I arrived, he was waiting at the kitchen table, worry etched on his face. "Where were you?" he demanded, voice trembling with concern. I lied, repeating the story of a friend's birthday running late. Something in my eyes must have betrayed me. He pressed, asking which friend, why I didn't reply to his call, and all the standard questions. My haphazard answers fell short. I saw doubt flicker in his gaze. That doubt became a seed of suspicion. Over the next days, he watched me more closely, noticing my phone usage, the slight air of distraction whenever I texted Alina. One morning, he confronted me, gentle at first, but insistent. "Is there someone else?" he asked, voice cracking with a heartbreak I'd never heard from him. My stomach lurched. I tried to deny it, but my tears told a different story. I couldn't bring myself to name Alina, to admit everything. I just sobbed, apologizing without explaining. He looked devastated, slamming the door behind him as he left for work. I sank onto the couch, despairing at how everything was unraveling. That night, Alina and I texted about the looming sense of disaster. She urged me to be honest with Victor, to face the consequences rather than let the secret rot us from within. I knew she was right, but fear paralyzed me. If I admitted the full truth, that I'd found an emotional and physical connection with a younger woman, what would remain of the life I'd built? Over the following days, tension rose at home. Victor and I barely spoke. He began sleeping in the guest room. My ring felt heavier than ever. Eventually, I told him. Not in tidy words or at the perfect moment, but in a rush of tears and confessions after a sleepless night. His shock turned to anger, then heartbreak. I tried explaining that I never planned this, that I'd been so lonely and found solace in a place I hadn't anticipated. It sounded pitiful even to my own ears. He yelled that I should have told him I was unhappy, that we could have gone to counseling. I wept, admitting I should have. But it was too late. He packed a bag and left, saying he needed space. Alina and I, meanwhile, felt an ocean of guilt. She told me she couldn't stand to be the cause of my marriage crumbling. I told her it wasn't her fault, that I was already adrift. But that didn't ease the tension. My heart ached whenever we parted at the office, each weighed down by the knowledge that we'd burned a part of my life to the ground. We continued seeing each other outside of work, but the once thrilling closeness now carried a heavy sorrow. I was terrified of losing her, yet equally afraid I was just latching onto a lifeboat while my marriage sank. In the end, Victor demanded a separation, uncertain whether we could ever rebuild trust. I moved some of my things to a friend's spare bedroom. Alina tried to help me with practical details, but I sensed her own turmoil. Guilt at the aftermath of our affair, fear that I might one day blame her for destroying my marriage. We had tearful conversations in her apartment, both of us torn between a desire to stay together and the reality of the wreckage around us. Months later, I'm still living in that borrowed room. Victor and I talk occasionally, mostly about shared finances or the possibility of therapy. Nothing is settled. Alina and I remain connected, though the dynamic is fragile, overshadowed by regrets and doubts. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I recall the initial spark of joy and wonder if it was worth this heartbreak. Other times, I think maybe that spark was necessary, forcing me to confront how numb I'd become in my own marriage. I have no tidy resolution to offer. I only know that in chasing a sense of feeling alive, I broke the foundation of the life I'd spent years building. Alina is not my villain, nor is Victor. We are flawed people caught in a swirl of longing and missed communication. I share this story as a testament to how quickly lines can blur, how dangerous it is to ignore the silence in your own home until it becomes deafening. I was 38, locked in routine, and found a mirror for my hidden desires in a much younger colleague. The consequences continue to unfold, scattering guilt and heartbreak in every direction. Perhaps time and honesty will pave a path forward. One day I might reconcile with Victor or forge a new life with Alina, or neither. For now, I linger in the ruins of a decision I can't fully regret, yet can never truly defend. If you're reading this, I can only urge you to pay attention to the quiet spaces in your relationship. If you can, speak up before they become chasms. Because the moment someone else steps into that emptiness, the fallout can be devastating, no matter how powerful or sincere the connection may feel.